As I mentioned, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, he's off to China this weekend. He'll be the first Australian Prime Minister to visit China since Malcolm Turnbull went there in 2016. It's funny how your memory plays tricks on you. I don't even remember Turnbull making that trip in 2016. Now, obviously, tensions between our two countries, they were at a peak during the COVID when Scott Morrison, the then Prime Minister, asked for an examination into what happened in that lab in Wuhan. It's certainly been welcome news for exporters, particularly exporters selling things like wine and crayfish and lobsters. Now, the PM will be pushing for even more restrictions, you would think, to be lifted. However, this cannot come at the expense of our national security, nor can Beijing's growing hostility and thinly veiled intentions be ignored. Now, he's just come from the United States, Anthony Albanese. It's going to be very interesting to see whether Xi Jinping asks him about that visit where he caught up with the US president. This comes, of course, as those tensions in the Middle East are just getting worse and worse. Joining me now to talk about all of this, the Director of Strategic Analysis Australia, Michael Shoebridge. Great to see you again. How fine a line does PM Albanese have to tread in Beijing when he gets there at the weekend?
Well, Steve, he's already paid an extremely high price to get this visit. So he's ended two winning World Trade Organization cases, one on barley and wine, the other on wine, like you mentioned, which would have formally established that China uses trade as a weapon. He's reversed his position on Darwin port, leaving it in the hands of a Chinese operator. And the biggest price he's paid so far just to get to Beijing is silence on China's increasingly dangerous military encounters with our Australian military and everybody else in the region. So he's not really walking a tightrope. He's given a set of concessions for this handshake.
What have we got on this side of this bargaining chip? I mean, what can we say to the Chinese that they are going to want to hear? And conversely, Michael, what does China want from us?
Well, so far, we're the one that has given the concessions. And in return, Xi Jinping has released one of three Australian political hostages that he holds, Cheng Lei, leaving Yang Henjun and Charles Ng in detention in China. And he's temporarily allowed barley and wine sales back into China. Wine not yet, but that's in a riskier business environment. So really, Xi's getting everything he wants. The only other thing he can get is Mr. Albanese looking like a supplicant approaching the emperor.
Yeah, that's going to be very difficult for him because, I mean, if you wanted to raise things like, well, do you say to Xi, why are you supplying weapons to the Russians? Because obviously they've invaded Ukraine and we're on the side of Ukraine. I mean, what do you say to Xi about the aggression from Hamas, the terror attacks from Hamas? Do you say anything about that? Or diplomatically, do you just have to bite your tongue?
Well, Steve, I think we'll have some diplomatic kabuki dances where mentioning Hamas and mentioning Ukraine will be recorded as having been done. But Mr. Albanese will have no expectations other than he's gone through the motions. But the problem is, with that slogan we hear so much of, cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, and engage in our national interests, the working model we're seeing from this government is they will concede wherever they can find a way and disagree only when backed into a corner with no way out, like continuing AUKUS and the alliance.
Yeah, and they've got themselves in all sorts of trouble also over, Gaza and Hamas and the Palestinian question with the government split, depending on which minister you're listening to, about, the Palestinian death toll. What do you make of the latest out of the Middle East? The IDF today saying, Michael, well, we've got Gaza surrounded on three sides, fighting continuing on the inside of this. I mean, this is obviously the plan. Where do you see this going?
Well, I think Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has been crystal clear that this war is not going to stop before Hamas suffers much more damage and destruction. There might be the occasional brief humanitarian pause, but the Israeli will is very clear. Hamas has badly miscalculated. Hezbollah and Iran see that this is too much trouble to get involved in, and Hamas now realises they've brought down too much on themselves and the Palestinian people that they rule so brutally over.
How much do you fear involvement by Hezbollah out of Lebanon?
I think it's a remaining large risk, but the Israelis are keeping more forces on that northern border, and the Americans are standing right behind them, including with 2 powerful carrier battle groups. That's really making the Iranians and Hezbollah think again about doing too much.
Always a pleasure to catch up with you, Michael. Michael Shoebridge there.